All right, today we're going to talk about ego.
Let's talk about ego.
Ego. Ego. Who's going to talk about ego?
Your ego.
Exactly.
Your ego is going to talk about ego.
Your ego is going to talk about ego. So if you watched the last video, hopefully, we use the word ego for what we mean for the thoughts that come up that aren't necessarily you getting involved with them.
The self.
Even if you may. It's this, when you're meditating especially, and you have that silence.
The mind.
And things come up, they're not usually you thinking about it. It's like the mind thinking things that wants to get you involved with them. Like, did I leave the stove on? It's like, and then you're like, did I leave the stove on? And that's the observer getting involved.
Yeah.
Whereas the first thought of, did you leave the stove on? It's like, oh, did I? It's almost like a voice. Like, have you seen a narrator in TV shows that like talks to the person?
That's a narrative.
In their head. I know but it's like it's like the voice of God almost in your head, like that's telling you, like, and constantly going through all this stuff, which I think it's a funny example to me to like think of that movie or whatever where the guy's like, oh, like interacting with his thoughts.
But also, here's another thing. When you
because we can see that he's separate, but you can't see that you're separate.
It's almost like
It's
when
like the irony.
you go to a new job or you go to school, and you're always right away trying to look for, oh, that's the cool person, oh, that's the boring person, that's the nerd, or that's a problematic, and right there is your ego qualifying what other people do.
Oh yeah. So I mean, judgments are ego.
Judgments are ego. Correct.
Identification, labeling is ego.
I am the smart in the class.
Attachment is ego.
I am a spiritual person.
I think that, yeah. All of those self-identification labels, not even just self though, everything.
You
other,
saying that we are
Oh,
wrong in our explanation, that's ego too. Because
We're
we are
right.
right.
Saying that we're right could also be ego. That's the silly part of it, is that you need to use your mind in order to participate in the ego game, which is why Buddha didn't want to talk a lot of the time or even do anything. He's like, every time I have to talk and like do this, I'm getting involved with ego, and it's another chance of me to get lost in it.
And he practiced what is called noble silence.
Yes.
A lot of the times when he knew that the question was asked to poke his ego, he practiced noble silence. One time there was this specific case of a person trying to ask him something that he knew, and he did not say anything. So he laughed, and one of the monks said, Buddha, you knew the answer to this. You have told us this. And then he responded, he didn't want to know.
He didn't want the answer.
He didn't want the answer. He was just testing me. So the reason why the Buddha practiced noble silence is because the question didn't come from trying to grow up or trying to develop his awareness, consciousness, his spirit,
just coming
his soul.
out of ego to challenge,
It was
to be
challenge.
egoistic,
and a lot of the times,
egotistical.
you're gonna have people on a lot of platforms. You're gonna call it YouTube. You're gonna call it Reddit. Or you're gonna call it Facebook.
Yeah.
Where you have this spiritual people constantly talking about something, but the moment
Oh,
they're
yeah.
challenged,
And they wanna just
they go crazy.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not saying that
That too.
that is wrong. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm just saying that there is a level of awareness where they haven't reached, and they haven't seen the question as objective as just a question. They see the person in the question. They no longer see the question. They see the person, and they see the attack. You can see the attack, but you can also decide if you want to be practicing noble silence or practicing noble answers. And the moment that you just realize this person is asking me these questions for a challenge, you'll know that's the intent. And the ego also helps us to recognize. That's the reason why I say you cannot kill the ego. You live with the ego, and you're gonna die with the ego. And I mean, unless you're like super advanced and you have meditated for like 40 years and you haven't even eaten nothing in 40 years and just meditation. It's a practice. That's why it's called a practice.
Yeah, we probably don't need to mention them yet. The people that are, those kind of spiritual beings are not something that we even know of in the Western culture right now. So I think let's get back to ego itself and where it comes from in the first place. Is society? It's when you're young, you're taught. First, you're taught what every single thing is, so that when you look at anything, you look at it, and your mind says, "This is the name for it," and it stops just being its unique self. It starts becoming apple or whatever you like. You have, okay, here's an apple, and you're like, your mind is like, "This is an apple," and you're like, "Okay, I know what that is now. It's over here, and it's in your little box." So you're like, "Okay, that's
It's a
that's
little
an apple."
programming.
It's your programming. All of that, everything, how you react and how you respond has been taught to you starting through labeling, starting through that label of apple. Whereas when you're starting to be aware and understanding, you know it's an apple, but you don't have to say this is an apple. You don't have to like classify it or put it into, you don't have to label it or identify it. You just are like, oh, and you put it down and it's still there, but you're not holding it anymore as like there's an apple over there. It's just like, oh. So that's, I think, a very small introductory way of how it started to form. And then your parents, of course, and whoever raised you told you, this is how you're supposed to act. This is what you're supposed to do. This is how you interact with other people. This is how you exist in society and everything else, and what you're supposed to do and how and why. So now that programming that comes back is ego. Basically, it's been programmed into you, and that's normal because kids obviously need to have a moral compass and know what's right and wrong in our society. And you can't really exist around other people without being able to do that if you're going to be involved with society. If you're going to go live in a cave, it's great. Yeah, no, you don't need it. But most of us, especially from a young age, we're not that self-sufficient, especially as toddlers and everything like that. And you need to be taught to exist in society, so the ego is a necessary evil that's created in us. Although at the same time, we should start teaching people that they are not that.
They're not that.
They're not that. They're not their identification of themselves even. Their name.
Like, what they do.
Yeah, what you're called isn't
like.
who you are. Like what you like isn't who you are. What you own isn't who you are. All of this stuff doesn't.
What you know
isn't
not who you are. Yeah.
Like pretty much so little is actually who the base observer self is over this ego self that's constantly active. So
I would say that the things that you like are ego. The things that make you angry are ego.
Yeah, the things you don't like.
The things that you don't like are ego.
Pretty much from the middle
everything
path
are ego.
If your mind is disturbed in some way, good or bad, and not at peace, that's ego. That's that simple.
And another way to see ego is these traits that make your personality, make the nerd that you are, or that you are the very intelligent person that knows about movies, or the very all that's ego. And it can be there are a bunch of skills that you know, and that doesn't mean that ego is bad. It doesn't really necessarily mean that is bad. It only means that those are traits that you believe you are those traits. And you're convinced that you are those traits, but you are not those traits.
Yeah, and we're mostly telling you that the point of knowing is to get perspective, to be able to be more in control of yourself and your actions, your thoughts, your everything, through knowing what ego is and why it happens and how it works. It's not that you need to be at war with it or fight with it or anything like that. It's more just that you can, instead of getting involved, you can watch it, and then you can notice it and say, okay. And then you can consciously choose, do I want to get involved with that right now?
Feeling
Maybe
like
you do.
Feeling like it's fun. Bike riding today and not feeling like bike riding tomorrow, it's ego too.
Yeah.
Because it's a change of mind. And the mind is creating this thought that I don't want to bike ride tomorrow because I already bike ride today, and tomorrow I'm afraid that I'm going to be tired. So, I mean, like, did you see the narrative growing?
Well, why are you tomorrow?
Exactly. But that's ego.
Exactly. I mean,
so you start developing this
you're here
whole
now,
narrative.
But your ego's in the future, your ego's in the past, your ego's not in the present moment. That's the number one thing about ego. It's never here with you in awareness. The ego cannot exist in the now. It's only planning or remembering or judging, seeing. Like, it's not peaceful at all. It's not in that moment. Like, it's not here now with us. It's not here now. It's not presence.
No wanting to say no because you always say yeah is also ego.
Well,
because you always say yes. But do you hear yourself? Like, I always say yes. I that's ego. always say yes. So the moment that you are like, I don't want to say no because I always say yes, it's already this precondition of you always say yes. You have created this image that you always say yes. So hence, then no, it's not part of your ego or your personality of the person you thought you are.
Yes, and I want to talk about two practices before we wrap it up. The first one we've already discussed is meditation, which is witnessing the thoughts coming up and watching those thoughts, watching the ego, and watching yourself react to it and get involved with it is a huge part of your practice. The other one, if you want to do something more fun, which you and I did when we first met, is every time you are doing something or saying, anytime you say I, stop and think I who.
I who, yes. Who.
And if you do that long enough, you'll start to notice that it's ego. That I who, like, oh, I don't want to, and you're like, I who? Oh, ego. Ego doesn't want to. Okay, because ego's getting involved with it meaning all this other stuff that it wants to create. And that's why, like, at work, you're, like, so bothered and whatever else, and you're like, but that doesn't have to be there because that's just ego. It's like, oh, I'm like, I could be here in the present moment and be totally peaceful. It's like heaven and hell are created on earth through ego. Basically, this could be the most peaceful everything and it's great no matter what's happening. Or you could be totally involved and angry when you're in a beautiful place, or you could be totally happy and not when you're in a terrible place. So those are just two practices. The first one is probably more long-term and lasting, but
I had a story
if you want to go a little faster. Yeah, we might need another continuation of ego because we didn't even talk about some of the other stuff. So you may see us again soon.
Yay.
Where are egos?